Okay, scholars, welcome to this video slideshow for today. Let's get back to talking about Kenji and writing or dissecting a prompt and writing the perfect or as perfect an introduction that we can. All right, so here is the prompt that I'm going to be giving you guys. We're all going to write an introduction to this prompt. So let's check this out. Remember, these prompts are a little more challenging than that which you might be used to. So let's read this carefully and make sure we understand the whole prompt. Now that you've read the poem Kenji by Mike Shinoda, write a well-developed introduction in which you analyze how the poet conveys the complex relationship of the protagonist and the United States through the use of literary devices such as point of view and structure. So though this prompt is smaller than the one that you guys will be doing for When the Emperor Was Divine, it's still a complex prompt that's asking you to do not one, not two, but three things. So let's look at this carefully. First step, of course, is whenever you get a prompt like this is to dissect it. When I say that, I mean, let's underline the key words and phrases that we know we're going to either directly include into our introduction, or we need to keep in mind while we're writing our introduction. So, of course, the first thing I go to is, the author, Mike Shinoda, and the title of the piece, and that it is a poem. I underline introduction. I'm not going to put the word introduction in my introduction, but I want to keep in mind that I'm not writing an essay. You're just being asked to write an introduction. Your charge, as is in every single prompt, is to analyze. And when I say analyze, I mean let's get level 2. And then here is what you're analyzing: the complex relationship of the protagonist and the United States. You are going to see this word complex again and again and again in your prompts. So keep that in mind. And then finally, it wants you to analyze it through the use of literary devices, such as point of view and structure. Now, so you have to choose a literary device or two, but you do not have to choose point of view or structure. You're not married to that because it says such as. So you always want to be careful with that. Don't feel like you have to write about point of view or structure, because those might not be things that stand out to you. Those might not be things you're excited about. And so you don't want to write about it unless you're excited about it. But let's talk about some of the poetic devices that I've identified, and also that I saw that you guys were identifying with your level 2 questions that I was reading for Kenji. You guys were focusing on things like diction, like the repetition of someday, imagery and symbol and metaphor. And by the way, I'm going to stop right here. Very often, this is such a great starting point when it comes to analyzing literature: diction, imagery, and symbol. Kind of call this the holy trinity of analysis, because diction, the author's word choice, is leading you to imagery, images that are created. And you could be sure that those images are probably symbolic or metaphorical. So that's always a great place to start: diction, imagery, and then symbol/metaphor. But a lot of you guys also mentioned the point of view. You got the points of view of the interviews and also of the narrator. And of course, this is a narrative. He's chosen to go with a storytelling poem. And is that significant? And then, of course, the historical allusions that take place. And there's paradox and there's irony in here as well. Notice that it has a sporadic rhyme scheme. Sometimes it rhymes, sometimes it doesn't. And if you're going to talk about that, why is it significant? Couplets. Some of you guys I saw even identified, couplets. Yeah, that's great. He's using couplets. He might be using couplets, but what is the purpose of using those couplets? What point is he trying to get across? We also have tone and tone shift. Tone is always an excellent thing to analyze when it comes to a poem. And then we also have those monologues and biographical interviews that are in there as well. Now, figurative language I put in here, but you should never say that you're going to use figurative language, because figurative language is just way too broad. And figurative language is the huge umbrella that all of these other literary devices fall under. So I bring that up because you don't want to ever say through his usage of figurative language. That's way too vague. You want to be more specific and narrow it down to one of these, or maybe some others that I haven't thought of or that I didn't notice come up yet in your level 2 questions. So that's the first thing you want to do is like, okay, what literary device am I going to choose? And I admonish you guys to be sure that you never choose more than 2. You guys are only going to have time on the test to write 40-minute essays on average. And if you try and write about 3 or 4 things, you're going to be too pressed for time. You're going to run out of time. So I would say pick 2, and sometimes 1 can even suffice if there's plenty of it in there to analyze. So step 1 in this prompt, you have to choose your literary device that you're going to be talking about. Step 2 is now you've got to analyze how the poetic device conveys the speaker's complex relationship with the United States. And then 3, you've got to get to the so what. What is the author trying to convey to the reader? What is the big lesson? What's the connection to society? All right, so I'm going to share with you an example of I'm going to show you my introduction. And with my introduction, when you see the blue is my hook. Now, you want to be careful with hooks because you don't want to take up too much time with the hook. You want to make sure that if you do have the hook, that it's relative to the theme. And so the big thing you want to watch out for is that it's just not a bunch of fluff, and that also that it doesn't keep you from running or that it doesn't make you run out of time. So blue is my hook, green is my thesis, and then my red is my so what. And then all of these things here that I underline are all making sure that I have all the things that were in the prompt are in my introduction, because I want to prove from the outset that I 100% understand the prompt and I know what I'm going to be talking about. So here we go, guys. Here's my introduction. In Mike Shinoda's narrative poem, Kenji, the reader is presented with a speaker that has an extremely complex relationship with the United States. In one respect, the speaker is proud that his family lives and has thrived in the U.S., a family who owned a store in L.A., crawling out of bed every day to bacon and eggs with a wife and kids living on the second floor of a little store he ran. This physical manifestation of the American dream no doubt makes the speaker's heart swell with pride and gratitude. What fortune to live in such a country. Nevertheless, this pride is conflated with indignation towards a government that would have his family pack their belongings in trash bags, making them prisoners of war in their own damn country. Through the motif of biographical interviews and the repetitive diction of someday, Mr. Shinoda shines a bright light on the fact that the United States government still has a long way to go when it comes to upholding its end of the bargain as it pertains to promised equality and opportunity for prosperity, and that to lose sight of a sordid portion of our country's past, we run the risk of interning ourselves once again to the imprisonment of unchecked fear. So you notice I got all the key elements that were mentioned in the prompt. I've got my author. I've got my title. I mentioned that there's going to be a complex relationship with the United States. I also drive home, that there's some complexity going on here too, because we've got pride, but we've also got it mixed with indignation. So I'm really driving home that I understand the complexity that they're asking me to analyze. I've chosen my literary devices. I'm going to go with the motif of the biographical interviews and the repetitive diction of the word someday. And then, of course, I front load my so what. Hey, look, here is what the author is trying to say. And it's really important to try and front load that so what when you can. You notice I didn't front load it when I did my Emperor essay. And I think this introduction is more powerful because I do have the front loaded so what. Okay, so you guys in a moment are going to write your own introduction to Kenji. And here's some things I want you guys to keep in mind as you're writing it. And I have this slideshow posted on my website as well, so you can pull it up so you don't have to just pause the video. You can pull up the slideshow. But remember, you got to get the author and title in there. You should have 1 to 2 literary devices, never go over 2. Keep in mind, you've got to get that complex relationship with the U.S. and the speaker's complex relationship with the U.S. And usually, and also, whenever we're analyzing poetry, don't say narrator. You're going to we use narrator when we're talking about prose And when it comes to poetry, we tend to use speaker. Keep your diction collegiate. Keep your quotes pithy, and make sure you guys are owning your quotes and integrating them. Use your ellipses, use your brackets. Watch your pronouns. Try to avoid you, and that's easy to do. Just, instead of using you, you can use one. One might think instead of you might think, or the reader might ascertain instead of you might ascertain. Now, I went with this strategy, HTS, which is hook, thesis, so what? But you don't have to write a hook. If we go back real quick and we look at this, I could start right here and not even have a hook, and I would still have a very strong introduction. Through the motif of biographical interviews and the repetitive diction of someday, Mr. Shinoda shines a bright light on the fact that the United States government still has a long way to go when it comes to upholding its end of the bargain as it pertains to promised equality and opportunity and prosperity, et cetera, et cetera. This still stands on its own very nicely, with the exception of that it doesn't have the author's name and the author's type, and also the title of the piece. But it's okay. You could, because you don't have to go with HTS, you can go with ATDS. And A stands for author, T stands for title, D stands for device, and then S stands for so what. And so a way to think about, if you're having a hard time starting your introduction, think of it this way. The author, Mike Shinoda, in his narrative poem, Kenji, is using symbolism and metaphor to teach us this, or to teach us that. So ATDS is a great way to get started as well. And if you have a flair for hooks, go for it. I tend to like them. They tend to get me warmed up. They try to get my creative juices flowing. But others just like to dive right into the thesis and dive into the so what. That is certainly fine as well. Okay, scholars, that is what I have for you. Now, I want you guys to go ahead and write your own introduction to the Kenji prompt. Again, I have the slideshow right here, so you can open it up and you guys can see the prompt. I want you to save that to a Google Doc that you will eventually send to me. I'll let you guys know how that's going to work later on. But go ahead and write your introduction. And I would time yourself for about, I'd give yourself anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes to write an introduction. And it is not a waste of time to spend 10, 15, I could even argue 20 minutes on writing the perfect introduction, because not only is it going to win over your reader, but it also gives you that perfect roadmap to keep you focused for the rest of your essay. Because you spend 20 minutes on the introduction, you still have another 20 minutes to analyze, and that can work out. So don't feel like you're wasting time if you're spending 15, 20 minutes on an introduction. All right, scholars, that's what I have for you today. Good luck on your introduction. I look forward to conferencing with you sometime in the near future on those introductions. You guys take care.